So the final session of our symposium is the panel discussion, which will be moderated by Dr. Susan Pell. And Susan is the executive director of the United States Botanical Garden, USBG. She holds a bachelor's degree in biology from St. Andrews University in North Carolina and a PhD in plant biology from Louisiana State University. Susan has spent her career at the public gardens as a botanist, educator, and a leader in positions at the New York Botanic Garden, Brooklyn Botanic Garden, and now at the USBG. Susan has moderated our panel discussions for quite a few years. He's very experienced. This year, due to this time constraints, he has a new strategy. We'll see how it works. Yeah, Susan.
All right. So I'd like all the speakers to come up and select a seat. My new strategy is inspired by the lack of time that we have and the promises that you've been given to be able to ask questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to take audience questions. I have a few if you all are extremely shy. And then we're going to have a closeout question for the entire panel to answer. So questions from the audience first. Anybody have a question? I know you've been dying to ask them. We've been holding you back the entire time. All right, we've got one right here. Wait, hold on. You've got to wait for a mic, I believe. Yes? Yep. The slideshow here. Thank you. Right, it's right here. Yeah. Okay, wait a second. Hello?
Okay, good. So my question's for Dr. Bear Don't Walk. So I'm curious how you think that the indigenous tribes of America can help, I guess, bring back a lot of those plant species and things that we no longer use, or we kind of deforest areas. Like, how do you think that there can be an impact between the community?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think it really comes to collaboration and recognizing, tribes are their own sovereign entities, which means that they have control of their lands and what happens there. So, for example, my tribe, we have an established wilderness area where we don't allow non-members to go in. And that's really where a lot of biodiversity has bloomed as of late in our wildlife conservation. But I think also in thinking about development or looking at what keystone species might be in some areas. I mean, like, because we have bitterroot all over the area, but people don't recognize it as being, culturally important or even just conservationally important. So I think it takes a lot of knowledge sharing and collaboration and really making sure that tribes have a seat at the table when we're talking about conservation efforts and how we can work together to preserve, protect, and continue our plants on.
Thank you so much, and congrats on your PhD.
Thank you.
Got another question right over here.
This one's for Dr. Knapp. I'm just curious, what is the species of Asarum that is being described right now? Like, what's it?
If you look in Weekly's Flora, I believe it is species 1.
Oh.
So Alan is really open with what he believes to be distinct new species. So this isn't a group that in the Southeast they still call Hexastylus, but I think the best worldview is Asarum, the genus Asarum. And so if you go to the keys, you can key it out still. So if you possibly run into this, we have ideas of where it might be found. And we're close to getting that described. But the story that I think Alan won't mind me saying is that the Symphyiotricum rhiannon found at that site is named after his daughter, and that this plant will be named after his son. And they will both be found only in the world at that one site.
That's sweet. Cool. Oh, my other question also, do you know what there was a point on the map of a species in southwestern Virginia that was a single site endemic? I'm just wondering, was that which species was that?
So there are two possibilities, and I'm being put on the spot with the flora of North America. So there is a Trillium monticulum or Pusillum variety monticulum that is in that area. And there's also, I think we removed it from the data set, but there's also a Dicanthelium that was recently described to science from just a single location. But I brought my laptop because I knew I'd get those kind of questions, and we can look it up after the talk, I promise. All right, thanks.
Thanks so much. We've got another question over here.
Yes, I want to thank the panel for a wonderful presentation today. I have a two-part question. One is, and anyone can answer it, what do you think of the current de-extinction movement that is underway with the use of genome science and this biotech company called Colossal, which is going in the Jurassic Park sort of direction? And how can we more effectively work with the UN's decade for ecological restoration, which would bring to bear the other elements of ecosystems which would be required to slow down, if not in some ways prevent the extinction of these plants and flowers, which are so critical for medicine, for a lot of things that we have them for, and for sustainability of ecosystems. Thank you.
All right, I'll take a stab at some of that. I don't want to get sued, so I got to be really careful. I know the joke I heard at the the World Conservation Congress is they called that the liar wolf, not the dire wolf, because they did. And I think we should be being honest about what was accomplished there. It was a technological marvel, but they certainly didn't de-extinct the dire wolf. They did a beautiful job bringing back white puppies, and then used the morphologic species concept to claim they brought back dire wolves, which is dangerous because it undermines the morphologic species concept. But if you want to talk about other de-extinction that is quite possible and I think would be useful, is to try to resurrect extinct plants from seeds on herbarium specimens. And I've been a part of trying to do that, and we haven't been fortunate yet, because herbaria are places life does not want to live. We don't want life, and we don't want pests, we don't want bugs, so we treat these plants, these specimens, kind of harshly. But so I think with a modern extinction caused by humans, where we have an opportunity like a plant, we almost have a moral obligation to try. When you're talking about something from a long time ago, where the ecosystem is completely different and you aren't going to bring back all the constituents parts of that ecosystem, I don't know if you can even be successful doing what you want to do unless you're bringing something into a zoo. And I don't know if I feel warm about that idea of de-extincting organism just to live in a zoo or a cage. But those are my personal opinions, not those of the Center for Plant Conservation.
Anybody else want to talk about that? Yeah.
Can I just talk about ecological restoration, which was the second point? I think there's a huge, ecological restoration is not the same as conserving extant populations, but ecological restoration with conscious decisions about what genotypes you use has numerous benefits, one of which is potentially expanding the population of the plants that you're restoring. The second is providing habitat for insects and for the vertebrates that depend on those insects. And then the third benefit is what it does for people. And so when people are engaged in ecological restoration, it engages them with positive decisions about what they do with their land. And so I'm in full favor of ecological restoration. I don't think it's a replacement for conservation.
I'm just going to give a shout out for horticultural science, and that both the things that Wes, both the things you talked about were really de-extincting plants through using herbarium specimen seeds, right? And then also repopulating or re-establishing ecosystems. Both of those take horticultural knowledge. And so combining our knowledge in the botanical sciences across all of the botanical sciences to affect conservation is really hugely important. We've got an online question.
Yes, hi. So first question from Cindy online says, Dr. Bear Don't Walk's presentation has me wondering what the other presenters are doing to engage with local tribal nations, or how would they like to work with tribal nations into the future? So this is a question for everyone but Bear Don't Walk.
Thank you for that question. So I work on very ancient plants, so millions of years old. But we are, in my museum, we are trying to engage with local tribes because our fossils are, we have a lot of fossils in Washington State in the Pacific Northwest. And there are bound to be stories and relationships between tribes and these fossils because they are everywhere. And we are very interested in starting conversations with those tribal members about about the fossils, how they connect to plants that they use and are culturally important, and also understanding how collecting these plant fossils impacted those tribes, like the quote that you had about the Salish, how they viewed the Lewis and Clark. So interested in that perspective as well. So we are starting conversations because we really want this to be a dialogue about what the tribes are interested in knowing from us and what they're interested in sharing. So it's very beginning, but we're envisioning workshops, talking about fossils and living plants, and are trying to develop a kit of modern and fossil plants to bring to tribes and tribal schools to talk and start the conversation.
So I'm not responsible for this myself, but I will say that there are, I think, 4 herbaria in the United States that are maintained by indigenous groups, different tribes. And so the herbarium community is very anxious to support them and what they're doing, and to expand also. There's been a lot of talk, this is not just in the herbarium community, but also in the environmental data community, to modify data standards where necessary to incorporate data that indigenous people might find important. There's a lot of issues there about data security, but assuming that they can solve that issue, is very important to make sure that the kind of data that are important to them are also recorded.
And I can say that I've had the fortune of working with various tribes over my career, in large part because of the U.S. Botanical Garden, hosting some workshops on crop wild relatives, where I got to meet a lot of different tribal communities. And one of the take-homes, I know I talked with Dr. Bear Don't Walk about this earlier, is the challenge of building connections to those communities. Because if you've met one tribe, you've met one tribe. And there are hundreds of tribes who need relationship building. And I know the Center for Plant Conservation has partners doing this work now. The Naples Botanical Garden is starting to work with the Seminole tribe in Florida. The San Diego Botanical Garden is doing extensive work with the indigenous peoples of Southern California. So it's going to be a community-wide effort to build the trust with these communities, because frankly, they don't have much reason to trust us. So we have a lot of work to do, but that's kind of a blind spot for conservation.
Any other questions from the audience? Yep, one right here. John, you can do it.
This is more of a botanical question, but it does relate to what Wes was just talking about. And it's to you, Andrew. What you observed in oaks is extremely complex, and it's been being worked on for hundreds of years now. Is this true for other groups of species like maples or birches? And if it is, how do we get to reconcile what Wes is talking about in terms of standardizing some of these names and some of these applications of species concepts?
That's a great question, John. Yes, so we know that these syngamions exist in numerous groups. Birches, the first syngamions were actually described in birches. And so you do see lots of hybridization and introgression. But in most of the groups that have been looked at, you can still distinguish the species with some evidence of gene flow between them. Now, the question is, what are the evolutionary outcomes of that gene flow? Can that gene flow save species that are help save species that are at risk? Can it help species expand their range in the face of climate change? We expect to a certain extent, yes, but of course it's not a replacement for conserving the species.
But I will really adamantly defend the work Andrew's doing, because we're going to look for his expertise and to tell us what species exist. And he's doing the work to help resolve what species exist, because he's moved science beyond the floor of North America in some of these groups. Because if you just pick that static moment in time, science moves beyond those moments in time. So we will always look to the experts working in these groups to tell us what species exist. It won't be someone with an opinion. We need to talk to people with the facts.
And it's reciprocal. We look to our conservation partners, both within the Arboretum and beyond, to say what questions should we be addressing? What are questions where we can maximize our impact, which is part of the reason that we're working with collaborators in Mexico, where diversity is very high and very poorly known. So trying to answer some of those questions concretely.
Thank you. We've got another question over here.
So inspired by some events in my neck of the woods, specifically the rediscovery of the greater chestnut weevil, how do you see some of this data flowing out into other things besides plants? So, as we redefine taxonomic boundaries for plant species, it seems like that's going to have an impact on entomology and on other members of the community as we clarify these boundaries.
Well, one of the things that we know is that insects that depend on plants shift based on what the genotypes of those plants are and what the environments are. So as people are so for instance, in the oak work, much of what we're asking there is really about how gene flow and species limits influence the gall wasp communities and the fungal communities that depend on them.
Got a question online.
Yeah, so this is a question for Dr. Bear-Don't-Walk from Joseph online. How did the people balance harvesting and conservation? How did they know how much they could harvest without depleting the population?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it became something very intuitive. We have a lot of foraging kind of rules, I guess, about how we approach different plants. And a lot of it is just like, take what you need. So really understanding, how much your family's going to need for the winter to stock up, or how much you'll need at that very given moment, but also not decimating one area. So our people moved from this particular foraging area to this particular foraging area based on, what was available, and they didn't take everything from the one spot. And this is really much reflected in a lot of our place names. We have thousands and thousands of different place names across Northwest Montana that are working on being categorized. And each of them will show, this species was plentiful here, or this trout was plentiful here, or that type of thing. But mostly it relies on a lot of our foraging practices that were passed down, and people only taking what they needed for the particular time.
Any more questions from the audience? Got one over here. And also, yeah.
Hello. So this is a question for, I guess, everybody. So what do you guys think of like CRISPR and genetic engineering to prevent, certain plants from, becoming to pest and things like that? Like, I guess the ethics, like, I know everybody has a different opinion about it, but I'm kind of curious, in your own fields, how do you feel?
This answer does not reflect my employer's opinions. Honestly, I feel like there's so much work that we have to do, and we have so much to save, and so much land to save, and so many populations to save, that these kinds of the higher the technology, the higher the cost per individual. It seems like we have a lot of basic work to be done. And so to me, that seems like, except in cases where it's the only way to save a species, I'm just not sure that it seems a distraction from a lot of the good work that does need to get done. That's my honest opinion. Someone else, please.
We got another question in the audience over here.
This question is for Dr. Strömberg. Is there a way or a method to account for the role of naturally occurring fire in the evolution of grass species, specifically C4 plants? And as a follow-on, do the phytoliths survive fire typically?
Okay, so the first question was whether we can study fire. Is that, I sort of didn't quite hear the beginning. Yeah, so it is an active area of research, and on many other areas in the world, there's basically in North America, this is something that we need to look at, but so far we don't have a fossil record. So traditionally people have looked at charcoal. More recently, they've started to look at geochemistry, and there are certain molecules that form during fire. But in the Great Plains, there's not good preservation for those things that we think, just based on what we know about the sedimentary rocks there. But it is something that we are hoping to look at. phytoliths do survive fire, and in fact, they can, in archaeology, which is where phytoliths have been used the longest, they use phytoliths, the appearance of phytoliths to look at fire, but it is a very under sort of, as far as a line of evidence, it's very understudied. So we need to do a lot more work to understand how we can use it. But yes, the phytoliths get darker, sometimes slightly melted looking. So I think it is something we can use also in the Great Plains.
Yeah, so online, just for everyone to be aware, we had over, I don't know, a couple hundred people online watching from all around the world, not just in the US. And this is a question or a comment, I should say a comment from Carlos. And it says, I am from Panama, a tropical country with nearly 13,000 plant species. Can you imagine the level of effort we need to do conservation of areas, especially against mining projects, constructions of roads, and bad government decisions? So that is a comment. I'm not sure if anyone wants to comment on that comment.
Keep up the good fight, Carlos. That's all. Somebody has to try, and I'm glad you're there trying.
Got another audience question here.
Hi, thank you all so much. I learned a tremendous amount today. I'm going to try to talk about the elephant in the room or the iceberg if we're on the Titanic, and just say some factual things that over the last, year and a half, we've seen a lot of policy changes to how our public lands, our federal lands can be used. We've seen a number of policy changes or proposed policy changes that would affect how we, our responsibility for stewarding our rare species. We've also seen a tremendous brain drain of scientists from this country and a decrease in federal investment in conservation and in plant conservation and just in science. So my question is, what are the conversations that you all are having at your institutions in terms of perhaps trying to pick up some of this important work or compensate for those losses? I feel like for a long time in plant conservation, we've counted on federal lands to really safeguard our rare species, just in the amount of wilderness that we have and protections in place. But if we can't count on that, or we can't count on it in the same way, and if we can't count on the federal government to provide funding, like for example, the Fish and Wildlife Service Section 6 funds, they're still around as far as I know. I'm not saying they're not. I don't want to cause panic. But if they're not, and we don't have anybody investing in the basic research of rare plants, how do we as a botanical community respond? Loaded question.
Thank you for that loaded hot potato, nameless woman in the back who I will not put on the record. But it's a really important question. So I'm trying to get my thoughts into a cohesive kind of way here. So the underpinnings of conservation have been changed in a short period of time. And many plants are probably much higher, are much more at risk of extinction than we perceive them to be, because when their assessment was made, there was an assumption because they were on federal land or because they were federally listed with protection, they weren't as at risk, because it's not bean counting. It's a combination of rarity, threats, and trends. So now the threat has significantly changed to plants quickly because of decisions. So we may have to reassess many of our plants because of these changes. The funding thing is a nightmare. I feel extremely fortunate that I'm at the Center for Plant Conservation right now, because we have a small but stable endowment, and that allows us to do science that needs to be done, not be at the whims of what we can get funded, because we are frankly in a scientific recession or depression right now in our country's history, at a time where we can't afford to be. But one of the things that I'm proud to be doing at the Center for Plant Conservation is trying to lead at this time, at this difficult time. And one of those things is last year, Emily Coffey at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, myself, Michelle from the American Public Gardens Association and Mark Richardson at the time from the BGCI, Botanic Gardens Conservation International US branch, hosted a plant conservation leadership summit in Atlanta last summer to talk about the changes in plant conservations and the challenges. And among them were the funding and what are we going to do as a community. And one of the outgrowths of that meeting will be an action plan for US Botanical Garden conservation. I probably have the name wrong because it's changed many times since we developed it. But the intent is to have a meeting which will be in Missouri, and we're getting governance now established as a community with those same groups to talk about our plan and our path forward. Because if without a plan, we're rudderless. And now we need to plan absolutely more than ever. I guess I'll just leave this with, if you know any funding sources, please let us know, because we have to find the funding to do the work, and it's not going to come from traditional sources.
Send your wealthy friends to Wes. All right, we've got to wrap it up. We're at time here, but I've got one more question for the panelists, and that is, how can people follow or get involved in the work that you do, and what are you most hopeful for the next 250 years of your area, your field?
Well, people are involved. There's probably not a herbarium in this country that doesn't depend on volunteer labor. There's a tremendous network of citizen naturalists or amateur naturalists who are documenting the change in our flora and making specimens. In the Denver area alone, we have an amazingly talented team who are tracking invasives and so forth. There's always room for more. The herbarium work never ends, and you can take care of specimens, or if you want to do floristic work, there are people who can teach you to do that. So there's an opportunity for everyone to be involved in the documentation of our plants.
I would just reiterate that and say there's communities, these kinds of natural history communities have lots of different forms. Some are educator communities, some are collections communities, some are management communities. Getting involved is the best way to build that kind of strength. There's strength in numbers.
I guess I would also add on, I think it's a really timely time to bridge the gap between indigenous communities and conservation efforts and the like. It's said that 70% of the world's diversity has been managed by indigenous peoples, and we can't do all the work alone, and so it takes allies, it takes understanding, it takes cooperation, collaboration, and the like. So really listening to indigenous peoples and all of the knowledge that they've cultivated over time. And I guess as far as following along with the work, I have a website that I run that has kind of more ethnobotanical content on Salish plants. It's called the Salish Plant Society. It's on Facebook primarily, a little bit of Instagram. I used to have a web page, but then I started a doctorate and that was not working out. So you can find me at rose@salishplantsociety.com, but also really just supporting tribal efforts. And as far as the next 250 years, my husband and I are about to have our first child. So I'm very excited to teach him about all of our plants and hope that carries on into his life and, the generations after.
Just to comment on the next 250 years, I really hope that similarly, that we can use paleontology or paleoecology to inform conservation. And there is something called conservation paleobiology already, where people are moving in that direction. But I would love to see a more direct connection between those efforts.
And so to follow along, please follow the Center for Plant Conservation or sign up for our email newsletter. When I think about the future, I'm actually hopeful, because when I started as a botanist at the age of 21, all of my friends were in their 40s. But I look across social media now, and there are so many young people who care. And that is so inspiring for me. And I live vicariously now that I'm not a field botanist through their discoveries. So please encourage the kids to learn their natural history, get out and deeply observe nature. Teach people plants. We need them to lift the green veil. And that's the only way to do that, is to teach them one plant at a time. And that's how we can turn the tide against plant blindness and getting people to care about nature.
Let's give our speakers one more hand up.